Now that we've considered what is occurring in the parasympathetic system, which has a very long preganglionic neuron and a relatively short postganglionic neuron, it's time for us to consider what's going to happen in the sympathetic system. In the sympathetic system, you may recall, or should recall, ingrain this in your brain, that there is a short preganglionic neuron and a reasonably long postganglionic neuron. So these things have some subtle variations in their anatomy that make them identifiable. What that means is that we are again going to have a ganglia, and the ganglia that we have here between the synapse of the pre and postganglionic neurons is largely going to be the sympathetic chain ganglia. But recall, this could also be, so put or, bold it, or a collateral ganglia. Sympathetic nervous system is characterized by ganglia that are very close to the spinal cord. Sympathetic chain ganglia actually is tucked in the groove of the bone just outside of the spinal cord. And so what we're going to see in this circumstance is, now mind-blowing operation here, we're going to draw in those yellow nicotinic receptors. So the preganglionic neuron, as it releases neurotransmitter into the cleft, is utilizing the same neurotransmitter, ACH, acetylcholine, that is being used in the parasympathetic system. All preganglionic neurons synapse to postganglionic neurons by utilizing acetylcholine and nicotinic receptors. Okay, what that means then is our interest then becomes over in the effector. In the effector over here, what sort of receptors are we going to have? And you may recall that the receptors that are predominant, important, and useful to us in the sympathetic system are either alpha receptors or they could be beta receptors, and that really depends. You don't oftentimes find alphas and betas together, so one pocket of tissue may have an alpha receptor, another pocket of tissue may have a beta receptor. This synapse here at the effector is going to be utilizing then the neurotransmitter that we associate predominantly with the sympathetic system. And that happens to be some good old norepinephrine or epinephrine or even dopamine. So again, in the terminal arborizations are the neurotransmitter that get released and diffuse across the synaptic cleft to bind to receptors, an alpha receptor or a beta receptor. Note, the common neurotransmitters used here are epi, norepi, or even a little bit of dopamine. Cool fact. Okay, so they're utilizing these different neurotransmitters largely between the postganglionic neuron and the effector. Note that even though the ganglia here in the sympathetic is a chain ganglia and the ganglia here is a terminal ganglia, the neurotransmitter and receptor that you are seeing in both of these are the same, nicotinic. And you may recall me mentioning before that nicotine largely has a soothing effect. It tends to promote the parasympathetic system and stimulate parasympathetic postganglionic neurons to calm you down. But occasionally we get an unpredictable response, and particularly if a patient is already in a sympathetic response, nicotine may happen to bind to this sympathetic preganglionic postganglionic neuron And if that takes place, we may actually facilitate or even enhance that sympathetic response. So nicotine at times could be a bit unpredictable in the response. Now, are you ready? How do you have time to have your mind completely blown? Hopefully so. Bear with me for the last tidbit on this tutorial for the receptors. So we're still drawing in our short preganglionic neuron and our long postganglionic neuron. This is where the sympathetic system functions outside of normality. It misbehaves. It doesn't do what we expect it to do. It doesn't even use the neurotransmitters that it's known for. The jerk. All right, so what happens here? We once again have ganglia between these pre and post sympathetic or pre and post ganglionic neurons. Once again, my orange is coming back out for the neurotransmitter that is released to, yet again, nicotinic receptors. So note that all synapses between preganglionic and postganglionic neurons are going to involve this synapse type. And then we're going to consider dun, 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 what's happening over here in the synapse between the postganglionic neuron and the preganglionic neuron. So in this area, mind-boggling material, I tell you, acetylcholine is released into the cleft and binds to muscarinic receptors. Say, what? That's crazy talk. And it is. But there are a few sympathetic. You guys know how hard it is to write and talk about different words at the same time. Just want you to know this is not an easy brain feat. Okay, mind-boggling. Back to the focus. A few sympathetic postganglionic neurons signal the effector by using muscarinic compounds. This is uncommon, but not so uncommon it merits ignoring it. This does happen. And if I recall correctly, I think this is the way that sweat glands in particular are stimulated. But don't 100% quote me until you fact check what Nicole Warwick is laying down for you right now. Okay, so now we have considered the receptor location and the neurotransmitter being released at each the parasympathetic and postsympathetic systems between either the synapse between the preganglionic and postganglionic neuron or the synapse taking place between the postganglionic neuron and the effector organ. So just a little data to kind of throw back. It could be useful for you to go to your flow chart that was provided that allows you to look at the organization of these tissues, and you may find alpha 2 receptors, maybe in places, or maybe a nicotinic receptor found in a junction between a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron, NM, or alpha 2s found between the postganglionic neuron and the effector of the tissue. Check it out. Could be useful. Hopefully this helped. Have a fabulous day.